You haven't seen these disturbing historical photos yet. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?
On July 4, 1916, Austro-Hungarian soldiers used this rock shelter on Mount Rombon as a hidden field telephone station. The rifle beside them was a Steyr made for Mexico, but the First World War pulled it into service before export. In 1966, a Gemini 12 astronaut turned a Hasselblad camera toward himself during a spacewalk and made what is often called the first space selfie. The visor reflection shows how carefully every movement had to be planned while working outside the spacecraft. In 1937, Dorothea Lange photographed this sharecropper taking a lunch break outside Clarksdale, Mississippi. The quiet porch scene shows a working farm family during the Great Depression, when one meal and one paper could hold a whole day together. In 1981, Indian space scientists placed the Apple communication satellite on a bullock cart during open-field antenna tests. The simple cart was used because it avoided magnetic interference before the satellite later launched from French Guiana on an Ariane rocket. On July 2, 1916, a long exposure recorded artillery arcs over Beaumont Hamel on the Somme front. The glowing lines look almost unreal, but each curve marked the opening days of one of the most studied operations of the First World War. In the 1980s, this East Berlin supermarket showed the quiet reality of shopping under the German Democratic Republic system. Long shelves could look orderly, but the small range of goods revealed how choice was often limited behind the clean aisles. In 1941, Italian Alcyone aircraft from the 239th Squadron flew in formation over southern Italy, their mottled paint blending with the land below. This rare view from another plane shows how air crews stayed close on long routes across the Mediterranean. On August 3, 1965, Highway Inspector Rex Heflin photographed this hat-shaped object from his work vehicle in Orange County, California. The three Polaroid images became famous because the shape looked clear, but the real explanation stayed debated. In 1918, Belgian refugees worked under belts and pulleys at the Belgian Munition Works in London, turning exile into skilled factory labor. Each bench fed the Allied supply line, showing how people pushed from home still shaped the final year of the First World War. These 1980s yearbook portraits show the future cast of Friends long before the show turned them into television faces known around the world. The simple school photos feel strange because they capture ordinary teenagers years before one of the most famous sitcoms of the 1990s. Around 1917, an Austrian Schwarzlose crew set up in deep snow between Monte Cevedale and Granzabru on the high Alpine front. The photo shows how the First World War reached thin air and glaciers, where moving one heavy gun could be as hard as using it. An early 20th century truck driver pauses beside a dump truck on a New York City street, with heavy sacks stacked behind the cab. The restored glass negative turns a routine workday into a sharp portrait of the labor that kept the growing city moving. This Austro-Hungarian motor cannon wagon looked like a small tank on rails with a rotating turret and its own engine. During the First World War, it could move alone or join a larger armored train, making it one of the strangest rail machines of its time. On December 19, 1932, Korean independence activist Yoon Bong-gil was photographed in Kanazawa, Japan, shortly before his sentence was carried out. He had become famous after the Hongkou Park incident in Shanghai, making him a lasting symbol of Korean resistance. In March 1971, Josef Schneider locked himself inside a cage outside the White House to draw attention to Soviet Jews seeking freedom to leave. His sign said he would continue without food until President Nixon spoke to him, turning one sidewalk protest into a stark Cold War image. In the 1980s, Christiane Felsherinov was photographed at age 22, 7 years after the interview that made her story known across West Germany. The Quiet Room feels striking because her autobiography had already turned one young life into a warning about Berlin youth culture. In this portrait, Ethel wears a patriotic costume from her long sideshow career, which began around 1915 and took her across the United States. She later worked with Ringling Brothers and Hagenbeck Wallace, and co-workers remembered her as a warm presence on the road. On June 27, 1962, the Bighorn nuclear test lit the sky above Christmas Island just after dawn, with the device set about 3,600 meters high. At roughly 7.65 megatons, the fireball grew so large that the scene looked almost unreal even on film. In 1987, a French court sentenced this former Nazi-era official to life in prison after decades of unanswered charges. The image feels striking because he had lived for years in Bolivia, turning one courtroom appearance into the end of a long Cold War escape story. In 1942, Poon Lim was left alone in the Atlantic after a German submarine struck the ship he was serving on. He survived 133 days on a small raft before rescue near Brazil, a record he hoped no one would ever have to break. In 1945, a young girl looked over the shattered center of Warsaw from a rooftop, with only streets and church towers still easy to recognize. The image is powerful because one quiet child stands before the vast scale of a capital that had to be rebuilt almost from nothing. This image appears to show soldiers and local civilians gathered in dense jungle, not a Lancaster bomber tail gunner exhibit. The crowded scene suggests a field operation or inspection, with people moving through thick vegetation under close military watch. This museum mock-up shows a Royal Canadian Air Force tail gunner position inside a Lancaster bomber, surrounded by belt feeds and dark metal walls. The tight seat and heavy gear reveal how little space crews had while watching the sky from the rear turret. On April 28, 1945, Hans Rummer helped remove Pennsburg's National Socialist mayor, save the local mine, and free workers held there. Within hours, he and 16 others lost their lives, turning a rescue effort into one of Germany's darkest last-day stories. In 1956, two airliners collided above the Grand Canyon, leaving investigators to study scattered wreckage in remote desert terrain. The accident pushed the United States toward modern air traffic control, changing how passenger flights were guided across open skies. In the Second World War, an Italian Alcione aircraft from the 261st Squadriglia was photographed over Malta. The dark shapes under the wing make the image tense, capturing the exact second its payload left the aircraft during the island campaign. On June 29, 1995, Seoul's Sampoong department store collapsed during a normal shopping day, costing more than 500 lives. Investigators later found ignored warning signs and unsafe changes, turning the pink building into a symbol of failed oversight. In September 1970, Canadian wildlife officials carried a sedated polar bear during a relocation effort near a northern community. The strange scene shows how close people and Arctic animals could come before modern tracking and safer transport became common. Around 1898, two women prospectors pulled a sled of tools through a muddy Klondike boomtown during the gold rush. The scene is striking because it shows women not as bystanders, but as active seekers in one of North America's hardest rushes. In 1959, a Hollywood actress was photographed asleep on a flight from New York City to Los Angeles, wrapped in a coat in a narrow cabin seat. The quiet image feels rare because it shows a world-famous screen figure in a completely unguarded travel moment. In May 1963, a high school student was confronted by police dogs during a civil rights march in Birmingham, Alabama. The photo spread widely and showed Americans how young protesters faced force while asking for equal treatment. On January 15, 1945, a German serviceman near Weiwertz, Belgium, raised his hand to hide his face after being taken into United States Army custody. His medals and worn coat make the frame feel personal, turning a roadside moment into a quiet image of defeat. This East German Stasi costume party from the 1970s or 1980s is said to show officers dressed as people they kept under watch. The strange outfits feel unsettling because surveillance had become so routine that it could even appear as office humor. In 1948, a Greek Special Forces soldier watched from a rocky position during the Greek Civil War, facing communist guerrilla groups in the hills. His calm expression beside the compact weapon shows how close and tense many mountain operations could become. On May 9, 1983, Asian Americans marched in Detroit after Vincent Chin's attackers received probation instead of prison. The protest helped turn one local case into a national civil rights moment, with the banner's simple words saying what many felt. In 1944, United States soldiers set up a crew, served weapon in a rubble-covered position near the fortified islands guarding Manila Bay. The broken ground shows how slowly troops had to move through prepared defenses in the Philippines. In October 1960, a presidential campaign parade moved through New York City as paper confetti fell between the tall buildings. The poster on the car promised leadership for the 1960s, capturing a moment when television-age politics met old street spectacle. In the 1990s, Italian Navy Special Forces were photographed in Mogadishu, Somalia, with a helicopter hovering low over a coastal position. The scene captures how international missions there mixed sea access, air support, and small teams moving through unstable streets. In 1943, Danish Jewish families crossed the Øresund Strait in fishing boats during a secret rescue effort organized by ordinary citizens. Around 7,000 people reached Sweden, making this night crossing one of the most remarkable civilian rescue actions of the war. On July 4, 1944, soldiers from the United States 2nd Armored Division stopped in Le Mole-Litry, Normandy, beside banners thanking America. The Jeep scene captures a rare, quiet pause as liberation was still moving through small French towns, street by street. In 1942, American prisoners held at Kasisang on Mindanao secretly marked the 4th of July, despite camp rules against it. The hidden flag and improvised table turned the room into a quiet act of identity, made risky by the guards just outside. In January 1972, a Yugoslav flight attendant survived when her airliner came apart more than 10,000 meters above Czechoslovakia. Pinned in the rear section, she lived through the fall, spent months in hospital, and later learned to walk again. During the winter of 1915 to 1916, French chasseurs of the 13th Alpine Battalion crouched in the snowy Vosges with rifles ready. Their shaggy covers helped break up their shape in the white terrain, a small detail from mountain warfare. This portrait shows a German Jewish communist who joined Brazilian revolutionary politics after marrying Luis Carlos Prestes in the 1930s. After a failed uprising in Brazil, she was sent to Germany while pregnant and later died in a camp in 1942. On July 4, 1976, crowds filled the streets for America's bicentennial celebration, with bands, flags, and balloon-shaped decorations moving through the parade. The scene shows how the 200th birthday of the United States became a public spectacle of color, sound, and motion. In 1979, Texas prisoners Ronald O'Brien and Raymond Riles played dominoes outside the Ellis unit, dressed in plain white uniforms. The quiet game feels unsettling because an ordinary break was happening inside one of the most severe prison settings in Texas. In 1913, Dutch photographer Tonnes Post captured Hilco Smed holding a sheep in a stable in De Lethe, Groningen, Netherlands. Behind the rough wooden wall, his brothers lie in a bed beside the animals, showing how closely rural families lived with their work. Stanko Kresoja, a Serbian survivor from Begovo Brdo in 1942, was photographed after an attack by Croatian Ustasha forces. Local accounts say 137 Serbs lost their lives there, making his survival a rare record from a dark Balkan wartime village. In 1971, King Mohammad Zahir Shah of Afghanistan rode with Queen Elizabeth II during his diplomatic visit to London. The carriage scene captures a formal moment from Afghanistan's monarchy, only 2 years before his rule ended while he was abroad. In 1934, a Works Progress Administration photographer captured boys playing checkers on a Baltimore sidewalk using a wooden crate as their table. The scene feels small, but it shows how children turned a hard city street during the Great Depression into a place for strategy and play. Shortly before launch on December 27, 1977, the bow of the Soviet cruiser Kirov towered over buildings at the Baltic shipyard in Leningrad. The angle makes the ship look almost unreal, showing the huge scale of late Soviet naval engineering. In the 1930s, a girl posed beside spring flowers outside the Hotel Ritz in Białystok, Poland, then a lively city with shops, theaters, and busy streets. The calm portrait feels fragile because this elegant corner of the city would soon belong to a vanished world. On July 4, 1976, a huge bicentennial crowd filled the National Mall in Washington, with the Washington Monument rising in the haze behind them. The photo captures a rare mass celebration where music, flags, and movement turned the Capitol lawn into one giant birthday scene. In November 1943, members linked to the Ukrainian insurgent army met in Budraj village to discuss cooperation among nationalist groups from Eastern Europe and Asia. The roadside photo feels rare because it shows a wartime political meeting held far from official halls under shifting front lines. In the 1950s, the Adidas founder tested football boots with removable screw-in studs, letting players change grip for wet or dry pitches. The small metal parts looked simple, but they helped turn boot design into a real advantage on the field. On December 7, 1941, a Japanese Nakajima Kate carrier aircraft flew over Hickam Field on Oahu during the second wave of the Pearl Harbor attack. The photo feels eerie because it was taken from above the target area as smoke rose and the Pacific War began in real time. In 1968, a Star Trek cast member met a crowd of young fans during the height of the show's sudden fan craze. The handmade sign behind him shows how a science fiction character had already become a pop culture symbol beyond television. In December 1970, protests spread across Poland after sudden food price increases hit families already living on fixed wages. This security film still captures one tense street moment when public anger met the force of the communist state. In 1875, a Dakota delegation sat for a formal studio portrait during a period of tense meetings with United States officials. The arranged clothing, canes, and feathers show how native diplomacy was turned into a carefully staged image for outsiders. In August 1941, the Engels family sat at a state fair table after winning an award as Ohio's most typical farm family. The strange detail is the crowd at the window, watching an ordinary farm breakfast turned into a public display of rural American life. In Belgium, this African child was photographed inside a colonial exhibition where people were displayed for European visitors. The small hand reaching through the fence makes the scene deeply unsettling, showing how racism was once turned into public entertainment. In 1934, photographer Willem van de Pol captured an older woman embroidering by a stone wall on Madeira, Portugal. Her needlework was part of an island craft tradition where patient hand skills helped turn quiet daily labor into income. In March 1944, German servicemen on the Eastern Front were photographed with snow and ice covering their caps, brows, and collars. Their frozen faces show how the weather itself shaped daily survival, turning every march and watch post into a test of endurance. On July 2, 1945, B-24 Liberators from the 23rd Bomb Squadron flew above the Allied invasion fleet off Balikpapan, Borneo. The scattered ships below show the scale of the final Pacific operations, with air cover moving over the sea like a second layer of the assault. On July 4, 1944, United States Marine Private First Class Raymond L. Hubert sat on a massive 16-inch naval shell on Saipan. While he emptied 3 days of sand from his boot, the casual pose showed how strange daily life could become on a Pacific island front. In 1951, a small boy watched an eagle drink from a fountain, close enough to study every movement. The quiet scene feels almost unreal because the child and the powerful bird share the same water edge like ordinary visitors on the same afternoon. In 1918, about 25,000 First World War soldiers at Camp Dix, New Jersey, stood in formation to create the Human Liberty Bell. From the ground, it was just rows of men, but from above it became a huge patriotic symbol made entirely of people. Around 1917, this rare autochrome image captured First World War soldiers inside a sandbag trench, giving the scene a muted color most wartime photos never had. The narrow passage shows how daily duty meant standing for hours in a man-made corridor of earth, bags, and silence. On November 24, 1964, Belgian paratroopers advanced through Stanleyville, Congo during Operation Dragon Rouge. Flown in by United States transport aircraft, they moved from the airfield toward the hotel where hostages were being held. In 1872, a British woman trying to enter a polling station was pushed back as officials blocked her path. The scene became a stark symbol of the long fight for women's voting rights, when even stepping toward the door could become a public test. This First World War-era photograph compares a Chinese woman's bound feet and tiny embroidered slippers with a teacup and an average American woman's shoe. The stage scale makes the old beauty standard instantly clear, showing how culture could shape daily life down to every step. In 1912, this first-class cabin aboard Titanic showed the comfort offered to the ship's wealthiest passengers, with carved walls, lamps, and a private bed space. The room looks more like a hotel suite than a ship cabin, making its final Atlantic crossing feel even more haunting. In 1929, the future tallest person in recorded history stood beside his father at only 10 years old. The photo feels startling because the boy already looked close to adult size, turning a simple family portrait into a sign of an extraordinary life. In 1913, students of the Imperial Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg posed inside a studio with canvases, plaster casts, and a dress skeleton as a strange classroom prop. The playful scene shows the old art school world just before war, and revolution changed the city around them. In 1917, a British officer linked to the Arab Revolt posed in traditional desert clothing, far from the usual uniform of empire. The portrait looks carefully staged, blending diplomacy, legend, and personal theater as the Middle East was being reshaped. In 1952, a Los Angeles police officer prepared for an undercover assignment, holding a handbag and a concealed device before going out. The staged room scene feels tense because her ordinary outfit was part of a careful plan to catch a dangerous suspect. In 1977, firefighters in Peshawar, Pakistan, rode an old fire brigade vehicle with ladders stacked across the top. The crowded truck shows how emergency work often depended on speed, balance, and teamwork more than modern equipment. On May 28, 1988, this wedding photo was taken at North Beach in Burlington, Vermont. The quiet outdoor portrait feels surprising because it shows a future national political figure in a simple family moment, far from campaign stages and public debates. In 1944, Finnish field doctor Rikard Sotamaa rested for a moment after days of work near the front, where fast care could decide a soldier's chance. He moved his hospital closer to the fighting and worked almost without sleep, helping save many serious cases. This early underwater photograph shows a diver holding a sign beneath the surface, when even making a clear image below water was a technical challenge. The heavy suit, air hose, and cloudy light make the scene feel like a first step into a hidden world that cameras had barely reached. On June 12, 1957, New York police specialists carried a suspicious device out of Penn Station using heavy protective gear. The box-shaped helmets and long pole show how early urban safety teams worked with simple tools in a place full of travelers. Built in London in 1851, the Crystal Palace became a vast glass and iron symbol of the industrial age and Victorian ambition. Its destruction by fire in 1936 shocked Britain, ending one of the most famous exhibition buildings ever made. In 1976, President Gerald Ford awarded Jesse Owens the Presidential Medal of Freedom, 40 years after his famous victories in Berlin. The ceremony recognized not only his Olympic speed, but also the quiet force of a man who challenged a false idea of power on the world stage. In 1936, Jesse Owens won the 100-meter gold medal in Berlin and later left the Games with 4 gold medals. His speed on the track became one of the clearest answers to Nazi Germany's false claims of racial superiority. In 1960, Osaka Castle rose behind Nippon Life Stadium, mixing one of Japan's most famous landmarks with the city's modern baseball culture. The view feels unusual because a centuries-old symbol of power stood above a crowded 20th-century sports ground. In 1930, Brooklyn Supreme was photographed as one of the largest horses ever recorded, standing 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighing about 3,200 pounds. His size made him a living spectacle, turning an ordinary horse portrait into a record of almost unbelievable scale. Noor Inayat Khan, a descendant of Tipu Sultan, first wrote children's stories before becoming an Allied radio operator in German-occupied France in 1943. Though trainers doubted her, she stayed in Paris for months after others were gone, sending vital messages under a false name. This photograph from the 1910s shows an elderly Korean couple standing in padded winter clothing outside a traditional building. Their worn faces and layered robes give a rare close look at rural life during the last years of Old Korea and the start of colonial rule. In 1890, Wyoming entered the Union while keeping women's voting rights, a stand it had protected since territorial days. Its leaders told Congress they would wait 100 years rather than join without their women, making the ballot box a point of pride. In October 1972, members of Uruguay's Old Christians rugby team survived when their plane went down high in the Andes. This blurred cabin photo became part of an extraordinary survival story as the group waited for weeks in snow before 2 men crossed the mountains to find help. In 1927, Benito Mussolini was photographed playing the violin in a carefully arranged room with a piano and a large eagle display behind him. The image feels staged to soften his public face, showing how power often used culture and performance as part of its image. Around 1941 or 1942, German tank crewmen assembled a small model of a Soviet KV-1 tank beside their own vehicle. The paper parts were not a toy, but a field recognition aid meant to help crews identify enemy armor faster. On June 25, 1941, these German airmen were photographed after their aircraft came down during the raid on Kyiv. Their young faces and dusty flight suits show how quickly the opening days of the Eastern Campaign reached the skies over the city. Around 1890, this image is said to show Naples' pizzaiolo Raffaele Esposito preparing pizza at a table with simple tools. It is often linked to the early visual history of pizza, before the dish became a global symbol of Italian food. Bartola became known with her brother Maximo as a 19th-century sideshow performer connected to Phineas Taylor Barnum. Her calm portrait is striking because behind the stage stories was a real woman whose image outlived the system that displayed her. On March 26, 1964, 2 major civil rights leaders met briefly at the United States Capitol after a Senate debate on the Civil Rights Act. They had often taken different paths, so this handshake became one of the rare photos linking their struggles in the same frame. This captured Messerschmitt Me. 262 shows a rare version fitted with a Mauser 50mm cannon in the nose. The jet already looked futuristic, but this oversized gun made it a flying test of how far late war aircraft design could be pushed. On April 1, 1945, United States forces began Operation Iceberg, the landing on Okinawa, with ships spread across the horizon. The aerial view shows the vast scale of the final island campaign, where farmland suddenly became the edge of the Pacific War. In 1993, an elderly Somali veteran reportedly arrived at the Italian command during the Restore Hope mission wearing his old Dubat-style uniform. He said he had served before and wanted to enlist again, turning a routine camp encounter into a living echo of East African wartime history. In 1901, men sat in long rows for dinner inside a London workhouse, where food, shelter, and strict rules came together. The hall looks orderly, but the identical tables show how poverty was managed, like a system, not treated as a private struggle. On April 2, 1976, a Mormon priest baptized a black man before his church lifted its racial restriction in 1978. The act was later ruled invalid and cost the priest his standing, turning a quiet pool scene into a protest against church policy. On February 19, 1945, United States Marines moved toward Iwo Jima as smoke covered the black volcanic shore, and Mount Suribachi rose ahead. The island was small, but its airfields made it a key step in the final Pacific campaign. In November 1978, Vietnamese refugees arrived at Dorval International Airport in Montreal, carrying children and bundles after a long journey from Southeast Asia. The airport stairs became their first steps into Canada, where a new life began in winter air. In November 1978, Vietnamese refugees arrived at Dorval International Airport in Montreal, carrying children and bundles after a long journey from Southeast Asia. The airport stairs became their first steps into Canada, where a new life began in winter air. At a 1994 election rally in KwaZulu-Natal, a South African child reached toward the weapon of a special task force member guarding Nelson Mandela's team. The image captures the strange closeness of hope and danger during the country's first democratic election season. This 1910s portrait shows a United States president in a rare, relaxed moment, smiling in a way formal photographs almost never captured. The close view feels unusual because it breaks the polished public image and shows a human detail usually hidden from history books. In June 1936, the Griffin children were photographed near Greensboro, Alabama, during a land use project. Under the so-called one-drop rule, their family was pushed between racial lines, making a simple childhood portrait a record of social exclusion. In 1926, a Czech-Slovak grandmother was photographed soon after arriving at Ellis Island, wrapped in a headscarf and heavy sweater. Her face carries the weight of a long journey, turning one immigration portrait into a quiet record of hope, age, and uncertainty. In May 1943, United States Navy men climbed a cold hillside on Attu, carrying crosses for comrades after the island battle. The steep ground and simple wooden markers show how the Aleutian campaign brought loss and ceremony to one of the war's most remote fronts. Around 1987, demolition work in East Berlin exposed the remains of the new Reich Chancellery underground bunker before new apartments were built. The bright rubble looks almost ordinary, but it was part of one of the most heavily loaded sites in 20th century Europe. On September 25, 2001, young Israeli settlers waited at Tapua Junction near Nablus, while a soldier stood guard beside them. The graffiti on the concrete shows how everyday travel in the West Bank could carry politics, fear, and hostility in one frame. In 1930, Los Angeles officer McNary posed with a dog taken in after a prohibition raid found no human suspect at a hidden supply site. The license tag became the only clue, turning a serious search into one of the strangest police photos of the era. In 1951, a woman posed on a small civil defense shelter on Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles with a sign marking normal ground level. The odd photo shows how Cold War fear entered everyday streets, where safety plans were built right beside homes and shops. In 1949, Miss Italy pushed Miss Sweden back onto the ropes during an international women's boxing match in Stockholm. The photo feels surprising because beauty pageant titles and boxing gloves met in one ring at a time when women's bouts were still rare. This winter scene shows men playing curling on a frozen outdoor rink, dressed more like city gentlemen than modern athletes. Their brooms, heavy stones, and formal clothes make the sport look almost ceremonial, yet every throw still depended on touch, balance, and ice. In 1941, civilians wore protective masks during a public safety drill, even placing one on a child in a pram. The warning sign shows how wartime life brought emergency training into ordinary streets, where families practiced for threats they hoped would never come. In 1918, Red Cross workers sat in masks beneath a United States flag as the flu pandemic filled hospitals and homes with urgent need. The poster behind them warned that their help mattered, showing how volunteers became part of the public health front line. Around 1910, a Mississippi fisherman posed with a giant alligator gar, a long, armored fish that can reach remarkable size in North American rivers. Its ancient-looking scales and wide body made the catch seem almost unreal, like something pulled from another age. In this museum photo, a famously tall basketball player stands beside a wax figure of the tallest man ever recorded and suddenly looks almost average. The height marker makes the contrast clear, showing how extreme that man's size was even beside modern sports giants. In April 1968, a civil rights leader's widow sat surrounded by family after the funeral at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The tight circle of faces turns a public loss into one quiet family moment, showing how a whole movement grieved through one room. In April 1970, the Apollo 13 crew stepped from a United States Navy helicopter after returning from one of the most tense missions in space history. Their smiles hide the fact that the flight became a race to bring the crew home after a major spacecraft failure. On August 25, 1992, the Unification Church held a mass wedding ceremony for about 30,000 couples in Seoul, South Korea. The stadium scene looks almost unreal, with rows of veils and dark suits turning private marriage vows into a global public spectacle. In September 1917, German soldiers ran through a chemical cloud in Flanders, Belgium, during the First World War. Their masks and blurred movement show how quickly a quiet field could become a place of panic when invisible danger drifted with the wind. In 1918, a German soldier wore a gas mask while carrying the new Model 18 submachine gun, built for close trench conditions in the First World War. Its compact shape changed infantry design, giving one man far more firepower than a long rifle allowed. In 1969, a new crew member aboard the landing ship, USS Dodge County, went through an initiation ritual on deck. The playful scene shows sailors throwing eggs as part of shipboard tradition, turning a formal naval vessel into a rough stage for welcome and belonging. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, people moved through ruined streets as smoke and dust still hung over the city. Reports of theft led officials to issue severe emergency orders, showing how disaster quickly turned into a struggle for control. In 1914, thousands of men lined up outside the Ford plant after Henry Ford announced a $5 workday, more than double many factory wages. The crowd shows how one pay decision could turn factory jobs into a public rush for industrial security. In 1937, London police officers trained in protective masks during civil defense drills as Europe moved toward another war. The rows of identical masks make the scene look almost unreal, showing how fear of attacks had already entered public preparation before the fighting began. In defeated Vienna, a crowd pressed into a Julius Meinl store as the city struggled with shortages and broken order. The scene turns a familiar shopfront into a tense post-war snapshot, where food, goods, and survival suddenly mattered more than normal rules. In liberated Vienna, Soviet traffic controller Alexandra Khavorostian directed movement near the Opera House as the city tried to function again. Her small bucket and signal pose make the scene memorable, turning a ruined capital into a place slowly returning to order. Around 1954, medical workers treated a captured Vietnamese man near Hung Yen, south of Hanoi, during the First Indochina War. The close frame shows how quickly a battlefield scene could turn into urgent care, with hands, water, and bandages replacing weapons for a moment. In October 1944, senior British commanders in Belgium examined broken parts of a German V rocket found after impact. The quiet inspection shows how the Allies studied new technology in the field, turning enemy debris into intelligence for the next stage of the war. In the years after the Second World War, thousands of British women sailed to the United States to reunite with American husbands they had married during the conflict. This crowded deck on the ship Victorious shows war brides and children turning a former aircraft carrier into the start of a new family life. In 1850, one of London's last night watchmen posed on Brixton Road with a lantern, rattle, staff, and old street patrol gear. The image feels like a bridge between medieval night patrols and the modern police system that was replacing them. In 1910, a mother and two children were photographed inside a cramped New York tenement apartment, surrounded by beds, wash basins, and hanging clothes. The room shows how many working families lived with little space, shared plumbing, and almost no privacy in the growing city. During the Spanish Civil War, women trained with rifles as the Republic tried to resist the military uprising that began in 1936. By April 1, 1939, Franco's forces had won, and this image remained a sharp record of civilians drawn into Spain's struggle. In April 1945, paratrooper Harry Lorenzo of the 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion posed near Katharineberg, Germany, holding his Thompson and a puppy named Caput. The tiny dog beside his field gear makes the scene feel strangely human, a quiet pause near the end of the war.